There's a thought I've had in the past, and that is, the Earth is too big for us. Too big in the sense that I don't think we can really grasp how big the world is. When I tell you to imagine what 40,000 kilometers looks like, what does that even mean? What about 5 septillion kilograms? Do you know how heavy that is? There are 8 billion people on this planet, right now, at this very second, each of them going about their lives, just like you. When I say that, does it even feel real? I live in the UK, spare me your tears, and when I try and imagine people like me just going about their lives in a place like Australia, Japan, all the way on the other side of the world, just as real and in the moment as me, with a life as complex and multifaceted as mine, it's surreal to imagine. When we picture people, countries and oceans away, suffering and dying, can we ignore it because we're desensitized to awful news? Or because they're so far away that they don't even feel real? Recently though, I've been having another thought. If 40,000 kilometers is too much to imagine, what about 24 quintillion? That's how far away the Andromeda Galaxy is. 24 quintillion kilometers. That's so far it takes light over 2.5 million years to reach us. The Andromeda Galaxy we're seeing is over 2 million years out of date. Earlier I said that the Earth was too big for us, but you gotta think of the perspective here. The Earth is big. For us. In reality, it's small. Really fucking small. Even in our own solar system, it is dwarfed by the next biggest planet, Neptune. And Neptune might as well be a pebble compared to the Sun, which is nothing but an atom of the Titan that is the Milky Way. Galaxies are so massive that when the Milky Way and Andromeda crash into each other in 4 billion years, the solar system is probably gonna be fine. There is that much space between stars, and I think it's fascinating that despite knowing all of that, the Earth still feels big. And when something that is less than a quark on the galactic scale still feels that massive, what does that say about you and me? The universe is infinitely large. It doesn't matter if it actually is infinite or not, it is so big it makes no difference. The same applies to its age. Again, it doesn't matter if it is or not, the universe is functionally immortal. And we humans are in a, as far as we know, unique position in that we are aware of that. We can't comprehend the absurd scale, but we can acknowledge that that scale exists, what it means for us, as well as our lack of comprehension. As you might expect, this leads to a lot of very angsty, despairing thoughts. Case in point, H.P. Lovecraft, who basically made this idea his MO. He was very into the idea that humanity's existential dread came from an increased awareness of the infinity of space, brought about by advances in space science, which would then clash with our long history of mysticism, religion, and occultism.
Combated by a mountain wave of plodding realism, cynical flippancy, and sophisticated disillusionment, it is yet encouraged by a parallel tide of growing mysticism, as developed both through the fatigued reaction of occultists and religious fundamentalists against materialistic discovery, and through the stimulation of wonder and fancy by such enlarged vistas and broken barriers as modern science has given us, with its intra-atomic chemistry, advancing astrophysics, doctrines of relativity, and probings into biology and human thought.
I sometimes get the sense that Lovecraft thought that humanity had almost grown beyond its means, that our evolution was in many ways a curse, granting us the ability to perceive things that we were never equipped to deal with in the first place. And as loath as I am to agree with the opinions of the greatest cat namer in history, when I look at the state of the world, all the pointless war, oppression, conflict and discrimination, I can't help but wonder sometimes if I'm in a particularly pessimistic mood, if we really are just a fundamentally small-minded species, trying to assert our own existence at the expense of others because we feel so insecure, so tiny and so insignificant in the face of a universe that we make absolutely no difference in. There's something you may have heard before, and it's referred to as the overview effect. Coined by Frank White in 1987, it's a phenomenon experienced by astronauts that occurs when viewing Earth from space. Supposedly, seeing Earth from this position brings with it a transcendent and awesome awareness of the true scale of Earth. Not a massive, incomprehensible sphere of might, but a tiny blue marble floating in an infinite black ocean.
What the astronauts were telling me was, and I knew before I went into orbit, or went to the moon, that there weren't any little dotted lines, but it's knowing intellectually versus experiencing it. And so there's also the striking thinness of the atmosphere, something that they see. And again, for most astronauts, the feeling that the Earth itself is a whole system and we're just a part of it.
However, I should mention that the overview effect has been subject to some critical re-evaluation in recent years. In 2014, historian and University of Chicago professor Jordan Bim published Rethinking the Overview Effect, in which he argues that the overview effect, as well as similar imagery and concepts, can and have been spun to fit a neo-colonialist, American imperialist narrative. Quote, beginning in the 1960s, scientists working within the American
military-industrial academic complex fashioned a number of ideas about the whole Earth as a total system in the service of the space race and other globally scaled projects motivated by fears of Soviet expansion. Two ideas and one image from this work are continually evoked by White in the overview effect. James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis's Gaia hypothesis, Buckminster Fuller's concept of space and Earth, and the blue marble photograph of the Earth surrounded by the void of space, captured by the crew of Apollo 17 on their return voyage from the moon in 1972. From these astronaut tales, White crafts a teleological narrative about humanity's past, present, future, and inherent purpose in the universe. For White, these astronaut reports constitute a giant cosmic road sign indicating that humanity is headed in the right direction. White argues that these tales should be interpreted together as a natural affirmation of the imperative to colonize outer space.
It's a shame because I do think the overview effect, in theory at least, is really lovely. Being able to truly see and experience the scale of Earth, immense in how simultaneously large and small it is. If we were to raise our level of thinking to that kind of scale, I would like to think we would treat each other and the world better. And to hear that what should have been these extremely humbling and compassionate experiences were often used to justify selfish, often dangerous short-term political ambitions, it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And once you consider the long history the US military and the wider Cold War conflict has with the development of space technology, as well as the looming commercialization of space travel, yeah, it's kinda hard for me to refute that point. Interestingly, in the same paper in which he criticizes the overview effect, Bim makes note of another similar one, the break-off phenomenon. Though experienced more by military pilots than astronauts, it still involves seeing Earth from a vantage point otherwise impossible for life. Unlike the overview effect, however, the break-off phenomenon is known to induce feelings of detachment from Earth, as well as broader feelings of anxiety and depression. Bim uses this to question the validity of the overview effect, or at least the interpretation that it should be taken as some kind of sign for humanity to venture beyond the stars. As much as I do want to believe the sight of Earth from space is this awe-inspiring image that forces you to think on a more holistic scale, I found myself nodding along to many of Bim's points. One that stood out to me was the fact that most of White's ideas, presumptions and conclusions related to the overview effect were heavily reliant on accounts from astronauts, perhaps somewhat naively assuming they all must be telling the truth, having been selected for their exemplary work in fields such as science, engineering, and the military. BIM describes a lie-to-fly culture, where astronauts are incentivized to lie about their experiences in space, particularly negative and distressing ones, so that they don't get dropped from the program.
Since the 1950s, aviation and space psychologists have worried that test pilots and astronauts habitually resist telling them, or anyone else, the truth about their emotions and feelings during missions, for fear that any negative or abnormal reports will result in being removed from flight-ready status. In Choosing the Right Stuff, the psychological selection of astronauts and cosmonauts in 1994, former NASA psychologist Patricia A. Santee discusses this epistemic impasse in the mental management of astronauts. The expression of emotions such as sadness or fear is considered a weakness. The pilot/astronaut culture is overtly hostile to the expression of such problems, in themselves and others. Denial is the name of the game.
Now, I haven't double-checked all of the sources that BIM quotes, but I do find just this idea fascinating, just as much so as with the overview effect itself even. The idea of people, many people even, growing up with this belief in the overview effect, this almost evolved form of manifest destiny, only to breach the atmosphere, look back, and instead of awe, appreciation and peace, they feel anxiety, dread, fear. And they can't talk about it. They have to keep up the pretense of a flawless emotional experience, because if they don't, that might affect their livelihoods and maybe even space science itself. I'm fully aware that I might be writing fiction at this point, but I would be lying if I said that I didn't have a bit of a guilty interest in these kinds of negative emotions. And maybe it's because of that I'd still like to believe that the overview effect is real, though perhaps not in the way Frank White initially conceived of it. This is just going to be me and my thoughts from here on out, but the past couple of years, as I've mentioned in past videos, I've really come to appreciate things that make us feel negative emotions. I've found moments of fear, depression, frustration and anger to be, yes, uncomfortable, distressing and painful. But through reflecting on those moments, on what it was that upset me so much, I've found that they've often been some of the most transformative of my life. I've learned much about myself by not going out of my way to experience negative emotions, but by earnestly processing and examining them when I do experience them, leaving the planet we evolved on, adapted to, something that for the longest time was the universe to us. Stepping outside its atmosphere, seeing it, us, for what we really are. A fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the total space of the universe. You don't just shrug off a sight like that. It stays with you, and whether or not it inspires positive or negative emotions, I think it would force you to really consider your place in the world, as well as your thoughts and relationships towards everything else that exists within it. And I would like to think that anything that does make you think that way can only be a good thing. Then again, Jeff Bezos went to space and he's still the same maniacal reptilian supervillain he's always been. So fuck it, let's just stay on Earth. We're all right here, innit? We've got anime. You know what? I think I'll risk the existential dread. I'm not spending another fucking minute on this dirt rock. Goodbye.
I threw myself right off the bridge to where the demons lay. But as I fall, I see the stars, they should be far away. I see that even my own death the universe will take. But it's too late to stop, I dive into a starry lake. I hit the void, stars are gone, no projection. There is no...
Okay, real outro here. This video was made as a tie-in to my album The Universe is a God-Shaped Hole. It's a mix of dark ambient, electronic noise, and industrial hip-hop that I made to explore themes of nihilism, existentialism, and Lovecraftian horror. It's my first time making a proper, full, standalone experience when it comes to music, and it's really cool to finally have it out there in the world. Originally, this video was intended to come out around the same time as its release last month, but what can I say, it's been a busy few weeks. Regardless, the video is out now, and you can listen to the album pretty much anywhere. Links will be included in the description and the pinned comment. A big thank you to everyone who's been watching and subscribing lately. I especially want to thank my patrons, in particular my tier 3 patron Michael Coolwood, for their support. If you want to get things like exclusive behind the scenes updates, early access to videos and music, as well as credits in my videos, then you can pledge to my Patreon too. Regardless, thank you so much for the support, it means a lot. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.